Scene 8, Cowabunga. We have to hurry in order to stop Shredder and save Manhattan. You guys really need to work on these stage title names. They are way too long. Hello everyone and welcome back to Let's Play Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3, The Manhattan Project. In the last part, we finished off stages 6 and 7, and now we're in the very long final stage. This is the only stage in this video. It's just obscenely long. It's got a lot of enemies, some varieties we haven't even seen before yet, and 2 boss fights of, I'm not going to say inconsistent difficulty, but the first one is definitely a harder fight than the second one. Additionally, this is weirdly where they start just throwing in some one-off hazard foot soldiers at you, like those 3 blue ones we just saw that just kind of do a cartwheel across the floor as damage. I don't know why this is the only time they really do that in the game. Especially given they've had one-time hazards otherwise in the game with the wrecking balls amongst some other things. Just a little weirdly inconsistent. With that said, let's check out what the manual has to say about this level. Krang spaceship! This place has atmosphere. Okay. From Dimension X? Sure, weird particle sentences. That can do some strange things to a turtle. Is the exclamation point after Dimension X meant to sort of be a comma, I guess? Seek out and destroy the Gorgon gravitation device before it makes sauce out of the Big Apple. I guess the Gorgon gravitation device is what's causing the floating effect. Now I think, but I didn't check. Is the storyline at the start of the game any more detailed in the manual? No, it literally is just the exact same plot line, unless it's on the second page. Yeah, no, there's no... That is the first time a Gorgon gravitation device has been brought up in the game whatsoever, and it's only in the manual. Well, now I'm curious if that's on, like, the Turtle Wiki at all. Let's take a look. Well, I type in Gorgon, and the only thing I see is Gorgonzola, which is the weird little Godzilla thing from that one episode of the 80s series, if memory serves. Also, basically, every single enemy type you've seen in the game before this is going to show up here in some form, so if you're not looking forward to seeing a particular least favorite show up, too bad. Now, by now, we've covered most of the Japanese version differences to the game between title screen stuff and cheat code stuff. But another one I should probably mention is, for some reason, the Japanese version just has less lag in it. And I want to say that has to do with the fact that the Famicom, in some regards, was a stronger console than the NES. I'm not exactly sure the technical aspects of that, but that sounds familiar because of the Famicom disk system existing, period. Though I'm not sure if this was a FDS game or just a Famicom game. Because for years I thought they were the exact same console, but no, there is a distinct difference between just a standard Famicom and the disk system add-on. And that was a surprising moment for me to learn, because I just always assumed it was one and the same, because that was the age of floppy disks. And now that's why, if my memory serves, on like the speedrun board, the game actively has different times listed for Japan and US copies. Whereas for most games that do that, it's usually a difference in like the dialogue being faster than the Japanese text. Or sometimes there's glitches that were only in the Japanese version of the game before they got fixed for the US release, or something like that. There is something especially weird about beat-em-up final levels I've noticed over the years, where it usually is just the long marathon of every enemy variety in the game. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Like, I think, for instance, the final normal level in TMNT 4 works perfectly fine, but here it just doesn't. I think what it comes down to is, it depends on the amount of abilities you have. I think the Turtles' abilities here in this game are better than they were in TMNT 2, but still very limited in a way that's kind of uncomfortable. By the way, we got a refight against this thing, but now it's pink, and I think it's a bit more aggressive in spawning its mousers and doing its fire attacks. You could probably still do the jump block combo pretty easily. But like, Turtles 4, the final level's fine, Streets of Rage 2, the final level's fine. But games like this, Streets of Rage 1, honestly, and most of the Final Fight games I've played they just don't feel as satisfying. And I guess you can look at that as a part of they learned better from their earlier adventures, and that's probably true. I think what it might come down to is the recontextualization of what you fought in the game to that point. Because, like in this game's case, we only see normal enemies here, and a couple new ones here and there, but there's no, like, weaker variants of bosses for you to face along the way. And beat-em-ups are the only real genre that can get away with it the way I'm technically talking about. Because, like, when an RPG makes you refight an earlier game boss fight as, like, a normal enemy down the line in random encounters, or as a recolor that has similar properties, there's a specific way you have to go about things. But in beat-em-up, it's one of the only genres where you can just outright walk up to a boss fight early or late game and just punch them. Other games usually have, like, well, they have these barriers or these shields you need to take out in some way, or they can only be taken out by this particular hazard, things like that. Beat-em-ups, not usually. You can just walk up and punch the dude. And I appreciate that. With that said, we're now on to the latter half of Krang's spaceship, which is just a slight color shift. There's nothing real different about this latter half, except I think it does act as a checkpoint, and they give you a health restore relatively early on in it. Health restores in this level are a little rough to grab, not because they're placed irregularly, although they kind of are. It comes down to when you should grab them with the screen scroll so you have them for the most optimal encounter. On top of whether or not you actually need it at all with your current health. Because if you take hits during the fight when it's on screen, hey, that means you just got a free recovery and that damage was meaningless. But if you got it before that, you just wasted probably some health points. Mind you, that more or less applies to all beat-em-ups. The only ones it really doesn't from memory is probably the River City Kunio-kun games, just because they have a lot more RPG elements in them, period. And Scott Pilgrim just outright took most of that for his game. Which I'm at least glad that game's finally available on more things nowadays. Apparently it's coming to Steam and, like... Actually, I think it just came out today, now that I think about it. If not today, like in the next 2 or 3. And hey, that's cool. I already have a copy of the new re-release, but I'm glad it's at least out there for people again, because... that game's got problems, especially in early game, when leveling is necessary, but with how the game's structured, it's real hard to do that without just replaying the first level over and over again. But the music and general tone is just so worth experiencing at least once if you like these types of games. It's also around this point in the game where I get really carried away with just trying to do the throw to the point of missing the throw a lot, and with how many enemies this later stage likes to throw at you, you know, mostly does it in groups of 3, it can get really nerve-wracking trying to grab an enemy, and then the 2 behind you just sneak up and whack you, and you've lost unnecessary health at that point. While the throw is easily the best attack in the game, there are definitely cases where you should just go for the normal attack just to help save some time or health. So keep that in mind, and also always remember when you're at 1 health, spam the special attack, and remember, you have invincibility frames so you can use it to just phase through anything. It's no wonder they made the special attacks always cost 1 health. Moving forward, and I believe in TMNT 4/Hyperstone Heist, if you use it at 1 health, you just do nothing. From memory, at least. That might be something I need to go actually test between this LP and the next, just to make sure I don't say something wrong. Because that's one of those things where there's a lot of mechanics in games where I know how they work for the most part, but then there's minor parts of it I completely forget unless I'm actively holding the controller and doing it. Very in-the-moment kind of notes, I guess. You know, I try so hard to stay alive in this game, but in some regards, this stage in particular, more so than the others, is much easier if you have just used a continue, assuming you have any left by this point. Because with the amount of lives you'll have from that, partnered with the roughly, I think from memory, you get like 150,000 finding all the enemies in this stage on the top of the bosses, you'll probably gain enough extra lives that you'll be much more comfortable than I am with my 2 extra lives at the moment, because I believe 0 counts in this game. I really wish we could get a general consensus on whether or not 0 should count in gaming, just so that you never have to try to remember which game does what. But that, if you're having trouble, I would honestly recommend trying that out if you can, just to see if that fresh start can really help with you here. On top of that, this is definitely a game where I'd recommend taking a break before the final stage. Not to sound like one of those Nintendo 3DS break reminder hints they would give you every 15 minutes. I'm looking at you, A Link Between Worlds, Bird. I don't need it. Because especially the NES controller, more so than a lot of other controllers, will just really dig into your palms in a way that's really uncomfortable. So taking like a 20-minute break between this stage and the previous one can probably really help your survivability here. With that said, from memory, I believe we're approaching the final boss gauntlet. I want to say we can get there within like the next 20 seconds-ish, I hope. Another thing with some of these final stages, if a stage doesn't have set pieces that helps you remember where you are on repeat playthroughs within it, it can be real tough to remember, well, where you are in it. Yes, that's the wall there where this is the last normal enemy encounter in the game. And it's just a few standard foot soldiers. Oh no, you got some pinkies trying to sneak up on me. Hey guys, how you doing? You're not the pinkies from Doom, but good, because I like throwing you guys. We got another laser gate in front of us. And of course, who do we fight before Shredder but good old Krang and his Super Krang mecha suit. This is the hardest fight in the game. He's got 3 attacks to start. He's got a missile attack where he leaves himself very open. If you stand right in front of him, the missiles can't actually hit you. They do try to home in on you, but if you're too close, they just can't do too much. He's got a fist that he can bring out at just about any moment. It goes all the way across the screen. So being exactly equal with him horizontally is just a mistake in most phases of this particular fight. But then he's got a self-electrification attack that's meant to act as a counterattack to you. He'll tend to do that in my experience more often than not when you're jump kicking, but he also might do the missiles there to try and just hit you out of it. Now, the reason I said he had 3 attacks to start is when you get to about the... I'm not sure if it's like the middle third or the latter half of his health, he does this, where now you deal with the legs and the torso separately. The legs will try to get about horizontally equal with you and either dash across the screen or do a kick, while the torso will either do an I-beam at you or try to smack you with a hammer. I believe they both share the same health bar here, so if you get a good jump kick in, you can hit both at once to get more damage than you might normally. But this is where the fight can just be a nightmare if you're low on lives. I'd argue Krang is harder than the actual final boss, just because of the separate phases going on here. Which is, honestly, about normal. Because Turtles in Time and Hyperstone Heist, Krang is definitely harder than Shredder in those games. If only because Shredder's attack pattern is just unbelievably easy to get around in that game. This is honestly one of the few fights where outright just spamming special attacks when you're high on health is definitively a bad idea, because A, it's not the end of the stage, for one thing. But because of how quickly either his I-beams or his punch can come out, on top of having to deal with the legs dancing around, you might not be able to rely strongly enough on those invincibility frames to just get around everything. Wait for him to use his missile attacks when he's fused together, at least, and just take your time. Jump around to get around his fist if you have to. This fight is rough. Which makes the absurdly silly music it has all the more insulting in a way. Oh my god, I'm just now noticing whenever Krang does the missile pose, the main Krang also does a little pose. That's kind of adorable despite it being a weird goo brain monster. But that's that fight down. Look at him. He's almost adorable. If only he wasn't evil. But we got one more boss fight left to go. And it's one that you should be used to seeing if you played Turtles in Time or Hyperstone, because he's got himself the ooze. It's time for Super Shredder. He's only got 3 attacks technically. One of his attacks is more so a dodge, where he just moves all across the field like that. The reason I call that an attack though is because you'll very often, if you're close to where he lands, follow that up with his main kick attack, which is meant to be a sort of like escape counter. The main attack you're gonna see him do, though, is a charge into a lightning strike. When, during the lightning strike, he'll teleport 2 or 3 times across the screen just to get away from you. The lightning actively homes in on you and then moves towards you, so make sure you're either moving when he uses it, or super attack through it. But the big thing you need to realize, that I didn't realize on my several first playthroughs, when he's actively charging the lightning strike, he is still vulnerable to damage. I figured he was electrified like the Krang fight was, but no, he is vulnerable doing that, so use that to your advantage. Yeah, there's his little wake-up slap. Yeah, I think maybe he actually has a kick and a slap now that I think about it. So watch out for either of those. But yeah, this continues a weird, funny trend in a way where Super Shredder, meant to be super imposing, is always less threatening than normal Shredder. That's true in the movies themselves, that's true in this, that's true in both Hyperstone Heist and Turtles in Time. And I want to say any other Super Shredder-esque moment has about the same tone. I'm not sure about Shredder's Revenge. I'm not sure if that's the final boss in that. I still haven't picked that up, but I'm assuming it is, and it probably still is, honestly. I think what partially makes this Shredder fight easy, on top of its limited attack pattern, is the fact that, like every other enemy in the game, he's locked to only doing 1 damage per hit. The 16-bit games would make their equivalent final bosses a lot more threatening, as they would usually do 3 to 4 hits, points of damage per hit, meaning you only could take, like, 3 or 4 hits, period, from them. But I guess to compensate, those fights are also overall easier due to their movement being a lot easier to get around. He doesn't even have a lot of health, it feels like. Maybe he just does, but because he leaves himself so open compared to some bosses, you just worm your way through it faster. Overall, Super Shredder's not a lot to write home about in this. And that's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3: The Manhattan Project. It's the best Turtles game on the NES, but I'd still say if you're wanting to play Turtles games, go to the 16-bit games, go to the arcade games, and honestly, go to the Game Boy games even, because those are very different but still very fun. While they're a similar bit size, because the Game Boy's, I think, technically 8-bit, the Game Boy games just have more interesting things going on, and the NES games are overall very limited by the technology. If it's not the button amount, it's just the genre they lock themselves in being on that system. But even then, I say that, but other beat-em-ups do more interesting things in the NES than the Turtles games on it do. Despite it being an entirely different genre than the arcade games were even at the time, the first NES game is probably the most interesting game to go back to because it tries a lot of different things. Do they all work? No, that damn level sucks. The final level is a piece of shit on all bounds. But it does more of overall interest, I feel. If you're gonna play Turtles 2 or 3, play it multiplayer. I think you can at least play Turtles 2 multiplayer. I don't actually remember. I know you can for this one. In fact, I want to say this game might have supported the... it wasn't called the multi-tap. That was the PlayStation. But I want to say it was a game that supported the NES 4-port thing. I think. Also, I don't know why, but there's something about this credit scene that's weirdly imposing. But with that, I'm gonna need to end this LP off here. Thank you guys for watching, have a great night, take care, and I'll see you guys next Let's Play, which is gonna be just as green, but prettier. See you guys then.